The first debate of the 2024 presidential election series is officially kicked off with the GOP starting it. We had 8 candidates arrive at the debate, Donald Trump sidestepping it and having an interview with Tucker Carlson, which I will be making a video on as well. We'll be diving into the nature of what happened in the debate, covering the fact that Vivek Ramaswamy effectively came out on top, going from what was completely unknown for most people to dominating the entire night, being talked about and taking all of the arrows, and realistically, if you're taking flack, that just means you're over target. Let's go ahead and see what we've got for this. From The Guardian, we have the specter of Trump haunts a debate as candidates jostle for the spotlight. And realistically, the only people that actually stole the spotlight and had the light on them the entire night were the people who were center of stage, Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis. Vivek being the one who took effectively all of the arrows. But, as I said in the beginning, if you're over target, you're going to be receiving flack. And who would you be receiving flack from in this situation? It would be the establishment candidates, such as Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, Ada Hutchinson. But what we see is Ada Hutchinson didn't even actually make any comments towards Vivek, and neither did Tim Scott. Tim Scott was relatively quiet for most of the night, not intervening when most people were having combative interactions. It was quite fascinating. But again, I wonder if this comes down to the nature of he's just vying for a position in whose ever administration. Let's get into this. Abortion and the southern border energized presidential hopefuls, while the war in Ukraine elicited divided opinions. No one's surprised that abortion and the southern border were things that people were in unanimous decisions on for the most part when it comes to the nature of how they decided to handle it. But the thing is, there were people talking about how what we had to do was effectively now overturn the Dobbs decision, because what we need is a federal abortion ban after conservatives fought for so long to have this pulled back and then brought back to the states. I don't understand it. The whole point of this was so that you could have Roe v. Wade overturned and then have the Dobbs decision installed, and in pursuit of doing so, this is a perfect example of how big government works. There's never enough. It's always another line that we have to cross because we have to push further and further. Okay, so going back, it says, during the first Republican debate on Wednesday, 8 candidates attempted to cast themselves as viable alternatives to Donald Trump, while for the most part studiously ignoring the shadow of the dodgy and popular former president who has declined to appear on stage. The Republicans alternatively railed on government excess, promising, for example, to slash funding for federal programs, while debating the merits of federal abortion ban and calling for an increased militarized southern border. So I'm okay with increasing the protection for the southern border solely because if we're going to be funding the defense of Ukraine's border, why are we not funding the defense of our own? It seems kind of ridiculous. Here's another thing that really gets me, though, is it talks about the fact of promises, for example, to slash funding for federal programs. Vivek actually talked about abolishing federal programs as a whole. Things like the FBI and breaking it down into multiple different sub-organizations, which is so fascinating, as well as going after the Department of Education and then making sure the Department of Justice itself isn't something that can be weaponized to go after people for political ends. What we see is this is going to be huge because the debate was somewhat calmer than without the belligerent Trump, which is a shame because realistically, we were robbed of one of the greatest comedy sets that was ever going to be presented to mankind, was Trump just goose-stepping around, bullying a bunch of these nerds again. Truly a shame because none of them would have had any actual understanding of how to properly deal with him. If you don't understand this, go watch the debates with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. She had no idea how to operate when he was just being Donald Trump because she was still stuck in her political mindset of like, you can't do these things, you can't say this, you can't act like that, you have to put on a facade and act like a puppet with marionette strings pulling your actions. Anyways, moving on, we're going to go ahead and see that what we have is exclusive Vivek Ramaswamy is bested for the performance and tops Donald Trump as the real winner in the poll for the Republican debate. I don't know if he actually beat Donald Trump per se, because Donald Trump holds so much weight when it comes to the actual Republican voting base that even without showing up, his percentage is so high already that he's effectively already a shoo-in for the nomination, and this is just a competition to see, as he actually already said on Truth Social, that, well, this is just to see who's going to get the role of vice president. Vivek Ramaswamy actually already stating in previous interviews that he doesn't believe he would be fit for the role of vice president because someone like him, as well as someone like Donald Trump, would never work in that role as a subsidiary to power because they would need the power and the capacity to wield the executive branch as they see fit to do what they need. I don't know if that's actually the case. Who knows if he's just saying that and that's just somewhat blusterous. Again, moving on, it says, some 28% said that Vivek was the best performer, piping DeSantis by only 1 point. So, barely overtopping DeSantis, but DeSantis being a well-known contender who is talked about consistently throughout the news, many people saying DeSantis worse than Donald Trump, which for many people, that's a thing that will get them to vote for him specifically. But Vivek going from being effectively a political unknown to dominating and overtaking the debate as a whole is unbelievable. It's incredibly fascinating, the fact that this is the first time this has actually happened, because Donald Trump came out on top the next day. Vivek came out on top that night. Let's go ahead and see what we have with the biotech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy winning the first Republican 2024 debate on Wednesday. According to an exclusive poll from the Daily Mail, beating out Florida Governor Ron DeSantis by the narrowest of margins, he put up a combative performance, trading blows with opponents such as former President Mike Pence, who seemed intent on cutting him down to size, and made him the focal point on many points of debate. And what's really fascinating about that for me is that Mike Pence is going after him, even though Vivek wasn't going after the Trump administration. And the thing that Mike Pence was always responding to was people talking about the history of the Trump administration. So Mike Pence realizes the threat that Vivek poses to possibly not getting into the prospect of being the vice president again. And that's what Mike Pence is going for. Mike Pence knows he's not going to be the president of the United States. But nonetheless, he's going to try and get the role of vice president once more. And he sees Vivek as a major threat to that. So, former Vice President Mike Pence came in third with 13%, followed by Senator Tim Scott on 8%, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley on 7%. Let's go ahead and get to the actual graph. Who had the best debate performance? Vivek with 28, Ron DeSantis with 27, Mike Pence with 13, Tim Scott with 8, Nikki Haley with 7, Chris Christie with 4, Doug Burgum with 3, Asa Hutchinson with 2, don't know 9%. And that's quite fascinating, because it's always interesting to see what the independents that are undecided think when it comes down to the fact of they actually make their decision. But Doug Burgum came out of literally nowhere. He got onto the stage because of a gift card giveaway, that he was giving you a gift card worth more than the sum of the donation that you gave to his campaign so he could get on the stage. Larry Elder effectively being robbed of his capacity to be on the stage, even though he met the mandate that was necessary to get on the stage when it comes to the necessary amount of individual donors that would purport you to push you over the line to get you on the stage for the debate itself. Genuinely wrong. He was robbed of an opportunity, and we were all robbed of another person who could have been just as eloquently spoken and against the establishment and the current regime as Vivek Ramaswamy was last night. Let's go ahead and jump in and see what we've got with all the footage. Let's get to the footage of the actual debate itself and people's reactions. We have from Charlie Kirk posting a footage from CNN. It says, "Watch all the hands go up for Vivek Ramaswamy when CNN asks who won their debate. Last night wasn't a debate, it was a funeral procession for the old Republican Party." And that's absolutely true. It was the death of the old guard, and it was nothing more than the resting to those people to go sit to their tombstones so everyone else could know that they're nothing more than establishment clowns, because the day and age of the old establishment era has come to an end. And with the proliferation of information coming to the degree that it has with the use of the internet, it will never go back to the way it was before. Let's go. Let's move on. And we see Fox News also has the same thing. It's literally a panel of people reacting to what happened. We have footage of multiple different instances of this. Let's go ahead and watch CNN's.
Here's what I want to ask you about. Who you thought did the best during this debate? Basically, who do you think won the debate? I'm going to do it in alphabetical order to be fair. Anyone think Doug Burgum did the best? That's 0. Anyone think Chris Christie did the best? He certainly got most of the airtime. A lot of the airtime, not most of the airtime. How about Ron DeSantis? How many of you think Ron DeSantis did the best? That's 2 people. How about Nikki Haley? 1, 2, 3, 4 people. Asa Hutchinson? Mike Pence? 0. Vivek Ramaswamy? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Tim Scott?
Nothing.
Okay, so this panel here thinks Ramaswamy won the debate.
And they would be correct based on my own analysis. I watched the debate live. It was really interesting. I was going to watch the Trump interview, but the thing is, it's much more interesting to watch a debate live when this stuff is actually going on. The interview with Trump is pre-recorded. Although the interview with Trump was pretty good, he did cop out on the Epstein question, which was absolutely pathetic in my mind. Moving on, we see Benny Johnson post, "Fox News panel declares Vivek Ramaswamy the winner of the first GOP debate. Much like how we saw with CNN, this will be showing who is going to be taking the lead."
Coming up on this post-game show for last night's big debate, we're going to check in with our live panels. Live outside. Ainsley's outside right now, where it's a beautiful day.
Yeah, these 5 wonderful individuals stayed up really late last night and came in really early to tell us who they liked last night. Beth, who'd you like and why? One word answer, please.
Nikki Haley, she was strong.
Okay.
That's what you see every single time anyone ever talks about a female politician. I don't know what it is. There's plenty of qualities to mention about a female politician outside of the word strong, but every single time, that's all they do. Every single time you would ask someone, well, why do you support Hillary Clinton? Well, she's strong. She's a woman. She's a strong woman. It's like, okay. That's not what I asked you. It's like, why do you support her in politics? It's like, well, she's strong. It's like, that's not a qualifier for anything. That doesn't explain anything. That's a buffer word that doesn't have to actually tell anything. Let's move on and see what the rest of the people have to say.
Okay. How about you, Sammy?
Vivek, Ukraine.
Okay. How about you, Mary Josephine?
Vivek, he was not a politician.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people are saying that. Caleb, how about you?
Vivek, because he brought the energy.
All right. And Johnny?
I'll say Vivek, 2 words. Exciting and genuine.
All right. People online, they agree with you.
Coming up on...
So, people online, they agree with you. So, 4 out of 5 are saying Vivek. 1 is saying, well, good old Nikki Haley. And it's the person who looks like she would be a Fox News mom. So, I can't say I'm genuinely surprised about that. But again, there's no actual proper word that describes the quality of someone like Nikki Haley in politics outside of strong, because that's all anyone ever uses to describe women in politics for some reason is strong. If you look at someone like Tulsi Gabbard is incredibly intelligent. She's a veteran. She's beautifully well-spoken. She wears her heart on her sleeve. She's anti-war. She stands for people. She goes to disaster zones to go see the aftermath of what happens and to go see the impact on the people that live there and that suffer through these things. You can describe Tulsi Gabbard with paragraph upon paragraph upon paragraph. But all these people can ever do when they're explaining these establishment politicians is, oh, well, she's strong. You see, she's a woman. Moving on, this is the reaction of effectively what happened during the presidential debate. This is Vivek Ramaswamy throwing a peace sign out to everyone at the end of the debate as Nikki Haley sits there with a still face, looking like an absolute drone, just like all the political class are that are bought out by lobbyists, which is effectively what the entire room was filled with. This picture is going to be a meme template that will be seared into the annals of history. When people are flipping through their history books in 2050, they will see this picture, because the way we will be explaining history through the process of explaining how memes were cultivating culture at the time will genuinely be hilarious. Moving on. Vivek Ramaswamy says, true privilege is not based on the color of your skin, it's being raised in a stable family. And these are the things that really tilted the crowd to being in Vivek's camp. This is what made them incredibly in favor to him. These are the kind of statements that have made people who knew who Vivek was before he was even on the stage incredibly favorable to what he has to say.
So, to the education question, how would you deal with the crisis?
So look, we have a crisis of achievement. Let's shut down the head of the snake, the Department of Education. Take that $80 billion, put it in the hands of parents across this country. This is the civil rights issue of our time. Allow any parent to choose where they send their kids to school. End the teachers' unions at the local level to allow public schools to compete. And then revive our national identity where every high school senior should have to pass the same civics test that frankly every immigrant, including my mother, had to pass in order to become a citizen of this country. And the fact of the matter is, look, there's a part of education policy that also rests with the family. I didn't grow up in money, but you know the word privilege gets used a lot? Well, you know what? I did have the ultimate privilege of 2 parents in the house with a focus on educational achievement. And I want every kid to enjoy that. So part of the problem is we also have a federal government that pays single women more not to have a man in the house than to have a man in the house, contributing to an epidemic of fatherlessness. And I think that goes hand in glove with the education crisis as well, because we have to remember education starts with the family, and the nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind.
Those are the statements that got Vivek Ramaswamy roaring applause from the entire crowd. And these are the statements that got Vivek Ramaswamy booed as if he was nothing more than one of the deplorables by the entire crowd. And keep in mind who this crowd is. They are the donor class. They are the super PAC lobbyists. Let's go ahead and see what they have.
Let us be honest as Republicans. I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax. The climate change agenda is a hoax.
Throwing absolute bombs. Comes out, I'm the only one on this stage who's not bought and paid for. And Vivek is a billionaire. He can fund his own campaign as he's done this entire time, and he doesn't need the money from super PACs, and he doesn't need Soros backing, he doesn't need to be backed by the WEF, he doesn't need to be sucking up to lobbyists that are going to be going ahead and lobbying up to Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. No, he doesn't have to worry about that. He's able to go in, sidestep all of them, and say, I'm the only one here who's not bought, and he says it to an entire room full of lobbyists and industry plants.
Agenda is the wet blanket on our economy. And so the reality is more people are dying of bad climate change policies than they are of actual climate change.
Governor Haley, are you bought and paid for? Hold on.
Okay, we're going to replay this, and I'm going to play it all the way through. One, Vivek touches on something that I've talked about a while and on this channel a lot, is the nature of what happens with the climate agenda and the carbon agenda. This is not something that is actually being pushed for the merit of saving the planet, but for the merit of totalitarian top-down control. Let's go ahead and replay this and have Vivek explain this.
Let us be honest as Republicans. I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax. The climate change agenda is a hoax. And we have to declare independence for it. And the reality is, the anti-carbon agenda is the wet blanket on our economy. And so the reality is more people are dying of bad climate change policies than they are of actual climate change.
Governor Haley, are you bought and paid for?
Okay, so he talks about the nature of the climate change agenda is false, that it is a hoax, that the agenda is a hoax. Not that climate change itself is a hoax, but the agenda. Funnily enough, I have a book that I've literally just finished on this. Fossil Future by Alex Epstein. Cannot recommend this enough. Thank you to Young Americans Foundation for sending me this. Fossil Future, Why Global Human Flourishing Requires More Coal, Oil, and Natural Gas, Not Less. Could not recommend this enough. Back on the shelf you go. Okay, so these are the comments that turned the entire lobbying class from being people who were supporting and cheering what he had to say about the nuclear family and being raised in education to immediately booing out loud because he called them out directly. Let's go ahead and see what Donald Trump did, because what happened to Vivek tonight with the audience also happened to Trump, an important flashback. And this is an important thing to think about, is the nature of what Vivek did. They booed him immediately, and in the end, they will come to realize he was right. Just like Ron Paul with what happened when he was explaining 9/11 with Giuliani and what happened with the Giuliani moment. Go look that up if you'd like to figure it out. I also have a video where I've covered something similar to this, and I brought that clip up. I'm not entirely sure which video. Don't go harvest yourself and go look for it. But point being, go look up Ron Paul Giuliani moment, and you will see what I'm talking about. And it comes down to the nature of something similar to this. What happened to Vivek tonight with the audience also happened to Trump. An important flashback. Let's get into it.
Let me talk. Quiet. A lot of times, that's all of his donors and special interests out there. So, that's what it is. That's what. And by the way, let me just tell you, we needed tickets. You can't get them. You know who has the tickets for the? I'm talking about to the television audience. Donors, special interests, the people that are putting up the money. So it is. The RNC told us we have all donors in the audience, and the reason they're not loving me, the reason they're not loving me is I don't want their money. I'm going to do the right thing for the American public. I don't want their money. I don't need their money, and I'm the only one up here that can say that. Eminent domain.
Okay, and then they get back to talking about the nature of eminent domain. So what's so cool about this, Savannah, silence yourself. I'm going to let a cat out for just a second. Okay, so what's so cool about the nature of this happening is we just have history effectively repeating itself, and this is so fucking dope because it's just Donald Trump doing the same thing that he does, which is just being a brash, garish person walking into the room like a bull in a china shop, doesn't care how he acts, what he does, what he says, because he's going to be the center of the room and he's going to take all the attention away, he's going to suck all the oxygen out of the room just by being there. And Vivek, I would assume, saw this debate and realized that he himself could do something similar, and well, he certainly did it. So, GB News says, Vivek just piped Trump to the post. Co-founder of polling company JL Partners, James Johnson, joins Nigel Farage to discuss the latest polls of the U.S. presidential debate with Vivek Ramaswamy leading the numbers. The U.S. presidential election of 2024. That's what they're covering. That's what they're talking about. They were at the actual debate itself. Nigel Farage is someone who was actually excommunicated from Britain's banking system and told he couldn't even open banks and that his money was going to be withheld from him. That is what happens when you go ahead and full send on the process of a digital currency, and that is what happens when you give the government more control in the nature of the technological era that we live in. They will effectively be able to eventually control the monetary system even further than they already do, to the degree where they will be able to make sure that you can't even bank with the systems that they operate. Okay, let's go ahead.
Well, James Johnson from JL Partners and formerly number 10 Downing Street pollster who has moved to America with his polling company. You're the only polling company that did a snap poll last night on the winners and losers. What are the results?
So we went out to a sample of 500 Republicans across the US, representative sample, and we asked them who won the debate, who performed best. And right at the top, well, it's the guest who's on your show later, Nigel, Vivek Ramaswamy with 28% of the vote. Very close behind him, Ron DeSantis on 27%, and then quite down in third, Mike Pence on 13%. Everybody else coming below 10%. Asa Hutchinson, Doug Burgum were nearest the bottom. Chris Christie quite near the bottom as well. So a great result for Vivek Ramaswamy. He managed to introduce himself on the national stage. He got some real hits in, and I expect we're going to see him get a bit of a poll bounce in those state polls that we'll see coming out over the next few days.
Okay, so what's wild about this, and again, someone made a comment that's just beneath this, says 500 people in a poll, and I made a comment about the nature of if you want to have a proper sample size for a poll, you want a minimum of 2,000 people. Moving on, we're going to head and continue and let Nigel Farage finish on what he has to say.
Well, I have to say, I did tell you this, folks, didn't I? I've been talking and writing about Vivek Ramaswamy for the last month. He strikes me. It was interesting, wasn't it? I mean, in a way, what he was doing was what Donald Trump did in 2016. He comes in and says, I've got no political baggage. These guys on the stage with me all have. I'm the new kid on the block. And it was interesting, wasn't it, that he was being attacked by the others.
He was, and a lot of people after the debate were saying, oh, we think Nikki Haley won, because she had that moment where she confronted Vivek Ramaswamy on Ukraine and on Israel. Actually, despite the cheers that she got in the room, the average GOP primary voter is a little more sceptical of those arguments about Ukraine, and they were very much on Vivek's side. It reminds me a little bit of 2016, if you remember, Donald Trump's first debate, when he got booed and he said, these aren't the real voters, these are all the donors and the special interests, and it was a real moment. Well, and you saw a bit of that this time as well.
I think that's right, and I think...
So, as I showed with that video of Donald Trump just a moment ago, which is actually just what they're referencing right here, it's incredibly relevant to understand the nature of what we're seeing. These are not the actual people who will be voting across the country. These are not the people who live in middle America. These are not the people who are stuck in the lower and middle classes that are being completely ground out by inflation and having the value of their dollar destroyed. The price of eggs is going up exponentially. Their gas is going up exponentially. And what they're doing is they're going to be suffering through higher taxation so they can go ahead and fight off the sun monster because of the new climate agenda that will be inbound, that people like Vivek Ramaswamy are saying that the climate change agenda is a hoax. Not that climate change itself is a hoax, because man-made climate change clearly happens. Look at the nature of how we inject so many different things into the atmosphere. It clearly has impacts, but the nature of the agenda that's being pushed for top-down totalitarian control, that in itself is a hoax. Moving on, we're going to let Nigel Farage finish just what he has to say.
Most people who would have bought tickets to attend last night would already be aligned to the Haley campaign, to, maybe the Chris Christie campaign, or whatever it may be. And Ramaswamy would not have had natural long-term supporters, which I think makes his result the more remarkable.
It does, and we asked another question at the end of the survey as well. We said, who do you think, reflecting on it all, who do you think is the real winner? And we threw Donald Trump in the mix. Now, even there, Vivek just picked Trump to the post.
Did he really?
Yeah, he did. Now, let's wait and see. I'm sure that's not going to be reflected in the other polls, but it does show that excitement and that sort of, he's given us a few new ideas that I've got quite excited by.
Okay, and that is absolutely incredible. The fact that there was even a poll where Vivek Ramaswamy surged past Donald Trump and ended up effectively beating him in numbers, that's unbelievable. I didn't think that was something I would have seen, certainly not after last night alone. You would think there would need to be much more time. You would think, honestly, Trump might even need to be suspended from the capacity of even being able to run for president. And the nature of how Vivek genuinely jumped in with fervor to defend Donald Trump, and the nature of how we have to stop using the justice system as a political tool to go after our political opposition, I think that's something that really sold a lot of people. I've been paying attention to Vivek for roughly a year and a half now. I've read one of his books, which was Woke Inc., and it was really good. He talks about the nature of corporate capture with things like ESG being environmental social governance, as well as CEI being climate equity index. and the dangers of how this applies to the free market and the nature of how government regulation through these processes will completely destroy the capacity for human prosperity. Okay, moving on, we have Glenn Greenwald tweets an amazing amount of intense attention devoted to Vivek tonight from a bunch of politicians who have been around and known for way longer than he's been. Internal polling must be showing interesting things beyond Trump's massive lead. And yeah, I absolutely agree, and this goes with exactly what I was saying initially, is the fact that Vivek is taking all of the flack, which means he is undoubtedly over the target. And if you're taking the shots, that means you're exactly where the American people want you to be. So, Bill Kristol says, Ramaswamy is impressively loathsome. Bill Kristol being one of the peak neocons in the entire warmongering establishment, one of the chief architects of the Vietnam War, one of the chief architects of the Iraq War. I tweeted at Vivek Ramaswamy, I said, retweeting slander from a Warhawk such as yourself is arguably the best promotional material he can use, and he gets advertising for free. Win-win for Mr. Ramaswamy. And another tweet from Bill Kristol, he says, somewhere in his twisted soul, Vivek can't stand the fact that Zelensky has done infinitely more for his country than Vivek will ever do for ours. More for that matter, Zelensky has done more for the U.S. than Vivek will ever do. What has Zelensky done for the U.S.? And there's always these stupid statements that people make with absolutely no qualifiers just so they can kind of get a little one-up on you, so they can have their little moral high ground, so they can point down at you and wave their finger. What did he do that was good for the United States? He doesn't explain it. There's no context given, not a singular thing. Let's go ahead and jump into this clip. It says, Vivek Ramaswamy says, I find it offensive that we have professional politicians on the stage that will make a pilgrimage to Kyiv and to their Pope Zelensky. Oh, man, when he said this was absolutely just chef's kiss. Loved it.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you would not support an increase of funding to Ukraine?
I would not. And I think that this is disastrous, that we are protected against an invasion across somebody else's border when we should use those same military resources to prevent across the invasion of our own southern border here in the United States of America. We are driving Russia further into China's hands. The Russia-China alliance is the single greatest threat we face. And I find it offensive that we have professional politicians on the stage that will make a pilgrimage to Kyiv, to their Pope, Zelensky, without doing the same thing for people in Maui or the south side of Chicago or Kensington. I think that we have to put the interests of Americans first, secure our own border instead of somebody else's. And the reality is, this is also how we project strength by making America strong at home.
So, Vivek says this is how we project strength by making America strong at home. And this is exactly the whole ideal of the Reagan-esque vision of the shining city on a hilltop. That there's a shining ideal to strive for and reach for. And then in the end, in the process, much like if you're going to shoot for the stars and you fail and you rest upon the moon, at least where you reside is so much greater than the point at which you once started. And that was the whole ideal of what the United States was. A bastion of freedom for the world to look to. Not a bastion of freedom to look around for dragons to slay in the pursuit of creating an ever-expansive empire that will effectively bleed us dry economically and destroy our culture, leaving us to the point where we are now in the degree of societal collapse that we are effectively in the West. So, we have a comment from someone who made a good old post down here on Bill Kristol's tweet, and it says, never question the brilliance of Mr. Kristol. He has the best rhetoric that the military-industrial complex money can buy. His predictions are always so accurate, like the 2-month war in Iraq. And this is Bill Kristol in 2003. Mr. Kristol's predictions on March day of 2003 are every bit as on target as his descriptions of the past. When Ellisberg raises the possibility of the new Iraq war coming to resemble the Vietnam in some fashion, Kristol insists that this is utterly preposterous. It's not going to happen. This is going to be a 2-month war. 2 months for the war in Vietnam. That is who this man is. That is the person we are seeing right now, the person who believed that the war in Iraq, a war fought over lies with zero justification that was pushed over a literal conspiracy being weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Well, it appears that that man is stating that what Vivek Ramaswamy says is immoral. A war that killed 1 million people. The man who instituted it and spearheaded it. That man is saying that what Vivek Ramaswamy says with his words are immoral. Unbelievable. So, let's go ahead and jump in. We have Nikki Haley here, and it says, Republican accountability. The truth is that Biden didn't do this to us, our Republicans did this to us. And I partially agree with this. This is a phenomenal point. Let's go ahead and play this. I'm going to go ahead and let another cat out because she's just crying at the door. moving on, let's play this and see what Nikki Haley has to say, and then we'll tie in Vivek Ramaswamy's response.
I don't care about polls. What I care about the fact is that no one is telling the American people the truth. The truth is that Biden didn't do this to us. Our Republicans did this to us too. When they passed that $2.2 trillion COVID stimulus bill, they left us with 90 million people on Medicaid, 42 million people on food stamps. No one has told you how to fix it. I'll tell you how to fix it. They need to stop the spending. They need to stop the borrowing. They need to eliminate the earmarks that the Republicans brought back in. And they need to make sure they understand these are taxpayer dollars. It's not their dollars. And while they're all saying this, you have Ron DeSantis, you've got Tim Scott, you've got Mike Pence. They all voted to raise the debt. And Donald Trump added $8 trillion to our debt, and our kids are never going to forgive us for this. And so at the end of the day, you look at the 2024 budget, Republicans asked for $7.4 billion in earmarks. Democrats asked for $2.8 billion. So you tell me who are the big spenders. I think it's time for an accountant in the White House.
Vice President.
So this is actually the only fiscally responsible comment that was made effectively the entire night when it talks about lowering the amount of money spent on government. And I get that we're talking about the nature of culture, and the huge thing that was always talked about consistently with Republicans is the process that we have to worry about the debt. We have to worry about the deficit and the debt ceiling. And you will not find a Republican that cares more about the problem of the debt ceiling than me, because, one, I'm not a Republican, I'm a libertarian, and I think they're absolutely terrible on the issue because their criticisms on it are poor at best because they're economically weak at best. Moving on, we're going to go ahead and get to Vivek Ramaswamy's response in just a second, but Thomas Massie, one of the absolute kings in Congress, says, yeah, I don't remember Nikki Haley supporting me when I was the only member of Congress actively opposing the CARES Act. So, Nikki Haley, someone who comes in out of nowhere stating the fact of how important it is to go ahead and, I don't know, reduce the spending from the federal government, well, she didn't actually come in and sign the CARES Act. She didn't care to speak up about it when we went ahead and signed an act destroying the economy that introduced the stimulus packages that completely annihilated the dollar, which is only going to lead to further cataclysm in the future. Thomas Massie being the only person that showed up, and as he said, effectively verbatim, I wanted to show up so that the death of our republic does not die by unanimous consent through vote. That is who Thomas Massie is. One of the few good people that is actually in Congress. I would say it's Thomas Massie, Justin Amash, Rand Paul. That's relatively all I've got when it comes to Congress. Politicians are horrible people. So, Vivek Ramaswamy responds to Nikki Haley, and she says, it's not that Israel needs America, America needs Israel. And this was when Vivek was talking about the nature of what we need to do on foreign policy when he started getting booed. A professional politician, being Nikki Haley, randomly asserts a point that Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't even hold. Vivek being a staunch supporter of Israel, which I myself am not. But the thing is, she comes out and outright lies without any context, zero justification, and any information to actually give credibility to what she said.
I want to learn from those and apply those to protect our homeland, Nikki.
Israel needs America. America needs Israel.
Okay.
So, she says it's not that Israel needs America, it's that America needs Israel. And Vivek's whole point is that the resources we're spending on Ukraine and all these military bases abroad that are completely extending ourselves past the point of the Monroe Doctrine, which would be that we are controlling our sphere of influence. Well, what he's saying is we need to use these resources to protect America, to protect America's border, like we're protecting Ukraine's border, which he then goes on to say later that one thing he really respects about Israel is that they actually have a border policy, unlike the United States, considering we're letting in so many illegal immigrants. And that was obviously such a major talking point of the debate. And even then, it wasn't even as big as a talking point as I expected because they kept bringing up Donald Trump so much. So, here we have from Liam McCollum. He says, oh, dude, I'm not even going to read it. I'm just going to let Vivek say it.
Well in your future, Nikki, I wish you well in your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon.
No, I'm not on the...
So, Vivek effectively saying, you are nothing more than an establishment shill, and you're doing this for the long con. People like you are nothing more than people who operate for the lobbying class. After you do your positions in government and you get these no-bid contracts to these massive corporations, what they'll do is they'll reciprocate the things you did for them by giving them positions on their boards at places like Raytheon, Lockheed, and Martin. Vivek absolutely knocking it out of the park. This was effectively the end of Nikki Haley's political career when it comes to the Republican nomination. I do not see her going much further. She is nothing more than a neocon. She's going to sit here and act like she cares so much about the plight of innocent people, but she will actively support wars that will send your sons and daughters to go die 6,000 miles abroad. Okay, we're going to cap this off with Glenn Greenwald, and Glenn Greenwald is just the absolute best. He talks about the nature of how we came to this perspective, and that Donald Trump wasn't even the person who invoked these perspectives in people. He was someone who simply understood what people were feeling, and he tapped into that. Let's let Glenn Greenwald go off.
But you saw these politicians, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Tim Scott, Mike Pence, who really sound like they're from the Republican Party of 2004, 2008, 2012. They would fit perfectly within the party of Mitt Romney and John McCain and George Bush when he was running. I don't think they have any conception of the fact that the reason 2016 and Donald Trump's victory was such a cataclysmic moment in American politics, it isn't that Trump ushered in changes in how Republican Party voters were thinking about things like militarism and imperialism and war and priorities and the swamp and their contempt for corporatism and lobbyists and the way that they run Washington. Those sentiments predated Trump. He detected them, he observed them, and he was the one who was able best to give voice to them. If you go back and look at Ron Paul's campaign in 2008 and 2012, he was sounding exactly those same things. Going into South Carolina and Iowa and some of the deepest red districts that are in the early part of that Republican presidential campaign and railing against neoconservatives and the evils of the Iraq War and the complete waste of funds that go into constant new regime change wars in places like Syria and Libya that not only come at the expense of the American people in terms of the money that's spent not on their interest but on the interests of other people, but also the dangers that are brought to the United States as a result of doing that. The reason why there's so much anti-Americanism, the reason why the world is now gathering in this confederation under BRICS, under China, that's expanding because of this narrative. And so I don't think these politicians have any sense at all of the radical changes in the views of the population of the people who compose their own parties. They sound like Reagan-era militarists when it comes to foreign policy, and that is just radically out of step with the Republican Party voter, which is why you see Vivek rising in the polls while Donald Trump has a 45-point lead, while DeSantis remains a viable candidate, while avoiding that sort of thing, and the rest of them who sound like they're from that old Republican establishment era cannot get traction, and it's inconceivable that they will, because the things they're saying actually resonate now more in the Democratic Party.
Glenn Greenwald, once again, as always, nails it. Just hammer, nail, perfect contact, zero flaw in his execution. I really cannot recommend Glenn Greenwald enough. Rest in peace to his husband who recently passed. It was a genuine tragedy to see that. Glenn's now raising 2 boys alone. They live in Brazil together. Glenn actually fled the United States due to the nature of persecution of journalists within the United States, and he runs a media company down there, and his show is called System Update. I will have it linked in the description down below, his Twitter as well as his channel on Rumble. Everything will be linked in the description down below. Thank you for watching. This has been a longer one than I intended it to be. The presidential debate was quite fascinating. Vivek Ramaswamy effectively ripped out the rug from all of these absolute clowns. Once again, we had something more fascinating than a standard political debate with presidential candidates. I really wonder what the nature of politics is going to turn into in the future. Either way, I'm here for it. Let's see if it turns into Arkham Asylum like I believe it will. Thank you for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it, a thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great. Peace out.